Dean Legge and Ryan Curley, another edition of Riding Home, this time not on the streets of Atlanta. We know now that Georgia will play either Tulane or Ole Miss, a rematch from earlier this year. And we already knew they'd be in the Sugar Bowl, Ryan, but immediate reaction to what looks to me like a pretty good draw for Georgia. They would get Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl. The only way they would have had to be the number one seed to get the Peach Bowl. So that was kind of out of the question. I think it looks pretty good if you're Georgia. You do not have to deal with Texas Tech and Indiana. They're on the other side. Let's just see what happens. And I think one of the few teams that Georgia could have struggled with, Notre Dame, is not in this thing, which we can have a discussion about that in a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of it being a good draw for Georgia. When you look at all of the other matchups, you don't really want to, not that you're worried about Alabama, you don't want to potentially deal with them again just
You
just because
won't.
you don't want to play a team a third time.
Alabama is.
Yeah, I don't think you want to deal with Oklahoma's defense as much as their offense has struggled for the majority of the season. You don't want to go up against a defense like Oklahoma has that could give teams trouble. Miami, Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is a better team than Ole Miss. I would flip-flop them in the rankings. I think that
Okay.
was clear for the most part to me throughout the season. So I think in terms of Georgia getting the winner of Ole Miss Tulane, and it's probably going to be Ole Miss, we saw how it wasn't close. It wasn't close when they played earlier in the season. I think it was in New Orleans.
Let me look it up. Keep it going.
But so this time it being in Oxford, even without Lane Kiffin, I think Ole Miss will probably win that football game. So we're likely looking at an Ole Miss Georgia Sugar Bowl for Georgia's sake. It's a team that you're familiar with. You have direct tape against. The play calling might take a dip, right? Because that's part of what made Ole Miss a really good football team is that on Saturday, Lane Kiffin is a very good coach and put them in good situations. And Georgia won a shootout. They've won in different ways this season, and that was one of the ones where they had to lock in at the end of the game on defense and get really consistent on offense throughout it. So I think it's a good matchup for Georgia. It's a place Georgia's obviously familiar with. They played in the Sugar Bowl, a few times over in Kirby Smart's tenure. I don't know how much that really affects the game because it's a neutral field, but I like the matchup for Georgia. There's much to say about all this bracket, but as far as Georgia goes, you're in a good spot. Playing Ohio State or Indiana was going to be, assuming that all three of these teams win, Georgia, Ohio State, and Indiana, that was going to be inevitable, having to deal with one or the other in the following round. I don't, I don't love the seeding, but we'll get into it more.
The seeding. Okay. Well, yeah.
I
I
have a lot to
personally.
say. So you just let me know when to
Well, no.
go.
Well, so I don't know that it matters a ton. It just it matters in that you play the six and not the seven. So would you rather play either Miami or Texas A&M, or would you rather play Ole Miss? I think the reality to me is Georgia's going to be favored. They'd be favored against all three of those teams. I don't know how much they'd be favored by against all the three of those teams. But the one quick thing I want to point out real quick, Ryan, is that against the Rebels, if you were playing them in New Orleans, that's going to be at least a 50-50 crowd. It might be more Ole Miss than Georgia just because of it being right there. So that is going to be one challenge. I mean, you're talking about state over. This is the equivalent to Georgia playing in Florida, which they do all the time. I think the game was in Oxford, and it was not close. It was 23-3 at the half, and 23-3 going into the fourth quarter. So then Ole Miss really just sort of blitzed them, got up 45-3, and the game was over. But I do think this is going to be a different Ole Miss team than we saw in the regular season because Lane's not around. It is what it is. Go ahead. I'm going to throw some stuff up on the screen. Christmas is right around the corner. I've got a few dog postings to show. One of them very important. Go ahead, Ryan. I'm going to show some stuff over the top of you talking, though. Go ahead.
Well, I think I want to start with they this committee showed that yesterday, the conference championship Saturday, did not have much bearing on what these rankings were going to be. They flip-flopped Indiana and Ohio State from dropping Ohio State to two. I thought there was a chance Georgia would move up to the two spot, and it does matter because if Indiana is to lose in that round, then Georgia could have power over going to the Peach Bowl instead of the Fiesta Bowl. Now that's just not going to happen unless Ohio State and Indiana both lose
That
in
can't
the
happen
quarterfinal
now.
round.
So
You
let me
think it's
be
impossible?
so let me be clear, because there's a reason why this is confusing, because it is confusing. So the number one seed is the only team that can pick
Uh,
where they play in the semifinals, and they have to pick today. And so I think the draw sets up beautifully for Indiana. Indiana and Georgia both got really good draws, in my opinion. Indiana got the best draw, but they would have to deal with Oregon in a pretty quick. Excuse me, Texas Tech would deal with Oregon. I misspoke there for a second. But the notion of playing in the Peach Bowl, that was just never going to happen, because they were never going to knock those two down to the. Georgia was never going to be the one. That was the difference. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, you still think it's 0%? Why would it be zero?
They cannot rotate it now.
Oh,
It's no
I
longer
see what you're saying
rotatable.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying in terms of the
Mhm.
bracket. Okay, so it's Fiesta if they go. Well,
Yeah.
that eliminates that part. But that doesn't change my overall sentiment with yesterday didn't matter that much. Georgia could have beat Alabama by 1 point. They would have kept Georgia at 3 and Alabama at 9. They boat race them. They crush them. It's one of Alabama's worst performances of the year in December, right? When this is supposed to matter a little bit, they didn't drop at all, right? So I think there needs to be a little bit more weight on what happens on Conference Championship Saturday. I understand, yeah, they got in. They're one of the top two teams in the SEC, even though they weren't. They just were for conference standings. But I mean, they just played a playoff team and got crushed. And Georgia now has beaten every team it's played
Yeah.
and didn't get rewarded in any way in terms of seeding. So as far I know that doesn't affect the Bulls as much, but that happens. And then
Well, it
Texas
affects who you
Tech,
play,
they
though. I
lose
mean, if
it.
Georgia were the
It
two,
affects who you play.
yeah, it does affect who you play in the quarters. It would not have affected the Ohio State, matchup in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, in this case, it's actually better for Georgia because I
I
think Ole
think it
Miss or
is.
Tulane's a better draw, but it doesn't change the integrity of the system, which is more my issue,
I
and that's
can't.
that's kind of the more important issue. I understand Ole Miss, Texas A&M, all those teams. There's no point in moving them around. I think they made the right decision by throwing Miami back in
I
there
agree.
over Notre Dame. That head-to-head has to matter when they have the same record, and Notre Dame doesn't have a significant win. Miami does by beating Notre Dame. There's no, I don't think there's a lot of point in wasting our breath on how we feel about Tulane and James Madison being in there.
It shouldn't be in there, but
It just
it's
shouldn't be
whatever.
in there. And it's what it is. And Oregon's over a 20-point favorite against James Madison. They made that a night kick. That should have been the noon kick,
So,
for
so let me
that Saturday.
go into the details of that too, real quick though, Ryan. I want to make sure, if you want to get this Keely Ringo signed, we only got about 12 of them left, maybe 10. Keely Ringo signed 16 by 20. Maybe I should make it on the big screen rather than just like half of the screen. If you want to pick this up for Christmas, make sure you're signing it. Make sure you're grabbing this today so that I can get that to you. Okay, it's no problem for me to get it into the mail, but it's the 7th right now, and well, tomorrow will be the 8th. Keely Ringo signed. There are only 33 of these. I have we have, it looks like 12 left. So get that while you can. That you can see the QR code on the screen. I also have a few Keely books from that original Dawg Struction. Ryan and I were riding around the night before the SEC championship game in 2021, trying to figure out what a book would be called, and that was quite. I remember where we determined where we were, because we were on Memorial Drive in 285. Or I don't have you on the screen. We were on Memorial Drive on 285 right when it became clear there's some softball fields right there, and that's when we said, "Oh my gosh, that's a great name." I don't know who said it though. Dawg Struction. But I was getting all that ready the night before because I thought they could beat Alabama and move on from there, but that didn't happen. And then we went on to Indianapolis. This will be a different structure. I think, to me, as it relates to conference championships, um, the notion that they're going to go away is incorrect. The notion that they'll change is not. They very well could change. You could have a triple header weekend in the SEC, and this weekend it would have been Georgia Ole Miss versus, and then that game would happen in Atlanta, probably at 4 o'clock. But the 12 o'clock would be, Texas against either Alabama or Vandy, and Vandy against A&M, or so it would be the top 6 teams play a triple header, and then if you're at that would include people being in like Alabama. You know, I did not think Alabama should have been knocked out. I didn't. I felt like that was not going to happen for a lot of different reasons, but I felt like they earned their way in. I do not think they're playing well. I think they matched up, besides the 2 teams that should not be in this thing in terms of top 12, they are matched up with the one team that they can beat for sure, which is Oklahoma, and they're favored. So I think Alabama could get to the Rose Bowl again. I mean, they could upset Indiana, but I don't think so. I mean, Alabama, either Georgia's so much better than people think nationally, or I mean, how Alabama performs in the Rose Bowl, which is 4 hours before Georgia plays in the Sugar, will be indicative of these things, Ryan. But I don't know. I mean, everything at once is hard to process. I mean, you and I were watching it on the way back on 316 with Indiana, and Ohio State lost that game as much as Indiana won it. And I don't know. I mean, Ohio State's still the favorite to win the thing narrowly. It's narrowing, but I think Georgia's got a real crack at this, and they definitely should not let it pass. And I think their draw is great.
Yeah, I think it's good for Georgia. I think the most interesting second round matchup is probably going to end up being Oregon Texas Tech. I
That's going
think
to be a knife fight.
yeah, that one's going to be good. I don't think Alabama's that great.
No,
I was kind of clear about that heading into the game last week. It's the only reason that there was hesitation about picking Georgia is just because of the history of it.
right.
But as far as football goes, it was clear Georgia was a better football team. It's been clear watching them all year long. Alabama earned being in the playoffs by beating Georgia
Yeah.
in Athens. Outside of that though, not really a great win, and they struggled their way through. I
Vanderbilt.
think for them, it's going to be tough to go into Norman and win that game with how poorly their offense is playing
Yeah,
and
but
going
dude,
up against a defense like that. I think it's going to be tough.
it
I
might
don't
be
like
first to
either of them
double.
against Indiana,
It might be
but
first to double digits in that game. I
it,
mean,
it could be. And I'm leaning Oklahoma right now. Obviously, we'll do picks and everything for that next week, but yeah, this could in terms of the quarterfinal round, it couldn't have laid out any better for Georgia. I think you'd feel comfortable, even though whatever about you can't beat a good team twice. You can. It has happened. I think they can beat Ole Miss again. And the biggest X factor for Ole Miss was Lane against Georgia and the play calling, and that just won't be there. And we'll have to see how good of a job Pete Golden does with them. I don't think the drop off's going to be completely drastic because they've got a good scheme and they've got really good football players. But Georgia can score on that defense. And if it does end up being Tulane, that'll be a little bit of a whole. It's not gonna be more Tulane fans, just because Georgia will probably buy that out. But it could be close. I,
it'll
I
be a
would still
lot.
take Georgia over that because we just don't see Georgia lose to those types of teams. It's been a long time since they've lost to a program that's not a Power Four team.
So I would also, I listen. This is not the whole game of who have they beaten, but Ole Miss's best win and kind of their only win is a win over Oklahoma on the road. It was a good win. They really should have blown OU out. After that, they kind of hit cruise control. They didn't play great against the Gators at all, and didn't play unbelievable against Carolina. It was fine, but they beat State pretty good. I would imagine they'll handle Tulane in a pretty significant way. I think for Georgia, as it relates to all of this, though, like I do think the offense has got to play better. They were efficient yesterday, Ryan. It wasn't unbelievable, but they didn't have to be. When you get the ball at the 10 or whatever, wait, how many times did they get it inside the red zone? At least the block punt, was that
Just
inside the
on the
red zone?
block, just on the blocked punt. Oh, the second time with the
Yeah,
turnover on downs at the end of the
yeah,
game. So they got it inside the red zone twice. They converted with two touchdowns in
yeah.
that, and then on a within midfield off
With
of the
Dylan Rabbit,
interception. On their short fields, they converted all three times with touchdowns. So really only drove the length of the field to score once.
bingo.
A little concerning
I
when you
think
look at
so.
that, but they didn't have to, and you do have to wonder, is part of that Kirby knowing the situation they're in, and they're saying, we're going to play this a little bit more conservative, knowing that we're controlling this battle defensively. I don't like to read into it too much with, hey, we're not going to put this on film, and we're just going to gut this one out.
It's
But
13 games into the season now. I mean,
exactly,
it's on film.
exactly. Alabama's got players on defense. It's one of the better passing
Yeah,
defenses in college football, and Gunner was efficient. We talked on riding home last night. I think that we gave Gunner as a group a little bit too much crap after I went back and
oh, really?
watched last night. He was careful with the football, and look, he was 20 for 26. So we're critiquing six throws,
No, well, I
maybe
don't know
maybe eight,
who is
maybe
we in
eight.
that. Was I bad
Well,
on it?
I don't know if it was you or Matt, but one of y'all was a little critical of just saying he wasn't that good.
Oh, that was
And
Matt.
he made some nice throws. He made some nice throws on third down. He didn't put the ball in harm's way, I don't think a single time.
No, he didn't.
He just missed a couple throws and missed a couple of
It
opportunities
was
by not
Matt because
seeing it.
Matt said guys are wide open, which is
Well,
indicating he's
and
missing
that
it.
is a little bit of an issue, and that's something that we saw more so early on in the
Mhm.
season with Gunner, and maybe he just wasn't seeing it as well last night. But you'd prefer him not to see that versus throwing the double coverage or just not be careful with the football. And what Georgia wants to be is what you saw last night, a suffocating defense that gets pressure and a team that can run on you. And they did both of those things last night. I think it was heading into the Texas game. Sarkisian was talking about how Kirby's going to dial something up on special teams. He did that in that game with that onside kick.
Mm.
And then they dial up something that they saw on film with Alabama's punt formation and knew, hey, we have an opportunity to get this block. And that's what they decided to do. And they go and they executed it. So Georgia won in all three phases
Yeah.
against Alabama last night. I think it deserved the two spot, and this doesn't really matter that much. I think it benefits Georgia to be the three and play Ole Miss. I think you'd rather play Ole Miss than what I think is going to be Texas A&M against Miami.
I don't disagree with that. Let me just say this. I was talking to Dylan earlier today, Dylan Weber, old dog poster. Uh, I think that the way that so what I'd say is this playoff, there's no great team. I mean, if it's Indiana, okay, but like there's no explosive offense. Ole Miss and Indiana, I guess, would be the two. But that's sort of ratcheted backwards a little bit for Ole Miss here lately. Um, I think the way that Georgia plays now, like Kirby has clearly got a style in this season, which is I'm not in a rush to do anything. Like we're not trying to go fast. Only in very particular instances are we trying to do these things. I think the way that they're playing is conducive to them winning 3 games. I mean, you're at the point now where you're talking about everyone in this thing needs to win three games or more to win it, and I don't think that's too much to ask for anybody outside of James Madison, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Tulane. I do not think that foursome can get it done. The other 8 teams can. Carson
You
gets
including
hot.
Miami in that?
I was just going to say Carson's got to get hot for Miami. I don't think that they have the capability to win 4 games. Is asking a lot. If particularly if one of those is going through Georgia, you're talking about the path for Miami. Like they got in, and that's great.
Oh,
That's a
it's one of
brutal.
the
I
worst
mean, like you're
draws.
talking about you know, on the road at A&M, a game they should lose. Okay. And then you got to play Ohio State, a pretty good defense. I mean, really, probably the best defense in the country. Or Oklahoma. Like, there are some pretty good defenses. And then in theory, you'd play Georgia or a shootout against Ole Miss. I mean, uh, Miami's not going to survive that.
It'd be pretty special if
But
they
A and
did.
M can't do it either though, man. If we're being
I don't think A&M will, but
honest,
they have the potential. They just have guys. They've
can
got.
can Ole Miss do it? I see. I don't think Ole Miss can do it
I
necessarily.
just think with the coaching change, it just puts a big asterisk on. I think they could have gotten hot with him,
Yeah,
just by outscoring everybody, but I don't think so now. They do have it's a good team, and they can
they can
score.
score.
Um, it did simmer down a little bit in November outside of that Mississippi State game.
Hmm.
I think that the top four is clearly the top four.
I
I think
agree.
those are the four best teams in the country. However you want to order them. I think Indiana, Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas Tech were the best four teams throughout the year. And I think that that's right. And that's important too, right? Like last year, it felt right with Georgia and Oregon, but it wasn't right with the different championship rules having Arizona State and Boise State. This is
Ridiculous.
much more correct in terms of
It
just
is.
the top end of it,
I
and
mean,
it'll lead into better matchups.
consider this, Ryan. the Georgia would be playing Oregon. Have we? Am I getting that right? Georgia, yeah, Georgia's quarterfinal would be against Oregon if we were doing by last year's rules.
If we were doing it by last year's rules, Georgia would be
They
the
would get Oregon,
two, and
or
Tulane would be the four.
yeah. So
Um,
there are still some things to correct with this. The simplicity of the four was great, but even with the four, people would say, "Well, Cincinnati should not have been in the four." I'm like, "Well, they look like a top four team to me when they played, but whatever." So now people will find fault with the 12. I don't necessarily have a problem with the 12. I think it's a pretty good stopping point. I think there's a lot of things college football has got to figure out that people maybe not smarter than me, I don't know, but people got to start figuring out and taking a look at. A lot of the problem is calendar based. We're never going to have a national championship on New Year's Day anymore. That's not going to happen. That's out the window. There's too many eyeballs that you can and therefore money by dragging this thing out, having 13 games, 11 games, whatever. There's just too much of that. But I'm looking forward to this. The Alabama Oklahoma game will be fascinating in 2 Fridays. Um, you got to wonder how those two will come into this thing. I mean, Alabama's just been through two real fights, and they basically have an off week before another real fight. That's asking a lot of those guys, and Georgia doesn't have to do that. They can. I don't think Drew Bobo is going to play. Man, it probably would be the national championship game before Drew can play. He was out there on a scooter. Some other guys might be able to, though. You saw Taylor out there. He should have scored a touchdown yesterday. That ball didn't get knocked down. He was wide open. So Georgia's gotten better and so forth. But I enjoy in the more game. Listen, man, I watched the Cal Davis game last night when they played Rhode Island. I texted you. You texted me back. So
I was
I'm
just hyping you up. I
I have
wasn't watching.
I have a problem, and I'll admit that. I'll watch the games, but there's no like. I wouldn't say that the top four this year. I think it's pretty clear that they're the top four, but I wouldn't say that like Ole Miss can't win it or that Oregon can't win it. The travesty here is that Vanderbilt, Texas, specifically Vanderbilt, Texas, and then Notre Dame not having an opportunity to play. And I went, listen, I love where I went to school. It's tiny, but schools, we got to get this right because right now there's too much sort of justice for these small schools. They should not be in this right now. They just shouldn't. No offense to Tulane. Definitely offense to James Madison. We do not need any presidential colleges playing for the national championship in football. Shouldn't happen. But here we are, and it's great for them. This is the equivalent to the Sweet 16 in basketball, Ryan. But this is ridiculous. Vanderbilt, Texas, Notre Dame, certainly Vanderbilt and Texas earned their way to getting into the playoff, and they're not there.
Yeah, I don't think Texas earned their way, but
Well,
I,
after I
I
said
agree.
that, you're probably right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just no.
but did Notre Dame? What their
Not
best one is
necessarily.
USC,
Not not necessarily.
right?
I mean, but I
But
agree with the notion that Notre Dame and BYU
BYU,
and
yeah,
Vanderbilt and even Texas are better football teams than Tulane and James Madison, and so that's where the system's flawed. I think 12 should be the stopping point, but it's not going to be.
no,
It's going to
mm,
go up. This is just not the same thing as basketball. It's not the same thing as baseball. It's just the
no,
talent
not
gap
at all.
with these programs is it's just a lot easier to notice and it's more drastic when you put it on the field. I think when I look at this, I don't think there's even 8 teams that can win this thing. I just don't. I think it's probably more like 7, maybe 6. So
So you stop at Ole Miss.
I'm stopping at A&M.
See, I don't think A&M can't do it to me.
I think A&M's better than Ole Miss. That's just how I feel. I don't think A&M's a top four team or anything, but I think A&M's they have a better defense than Ole Miss, and they've got better talent on offense. They just have a quarterback that's a little bit
Up and
more
down.
inconsistent than
Yeah.
Trinidad Chambliss, but a similar talent. I think when it's clicking for A&M, it's better than when it was clicking for Ole Miss this year. That's where I would cut it off. I think that top seven that they have, if it's someone outside of that, color me extremely shocked.
Well, pay attention to Dog Posts as we go on, and we'll have more reaction this week. Thanks for watching this edition of Riding Home. The Dogs are in the Sugar Bowl. We'll see who they play. Thanks for watching.